We are living through a time of overlapping crises, a growing alliance between corporate power and an authoritarian president, a media landscape flooded with lies, even a possible war with Venezuela. Well, Molly Jong-Fast, she's been on the front lines of all of it. She's a journalist, an author, and a political analyst. And she has spent years dissecting Trumpism, the media's failures, and what incentives drive the elites to capitulate and cooperate with Donald Trump. Today, we talk about whether there's any reason for optimism this year, what the future of media looks like, how AI slop and fake news may infect our ecosystem, and why powerful corporations and law firms aren't just surrendering to Trump, they've gone all in and become collaborators. But before we get into any of that, subscribe to this channel to stay informed about how you can defend democracy. Molly Jong-Fast, welcome back to Defending Democracy.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Molly, I have to say, everybody is in there. It's a new year. Great things are happening. Like, Trump is weakened. The Republicans are abandoning him. And honestly, I am in the we're 11 months from elections. He's going to try to steal them. The Department of Justice is out of control. We may go to war in Venezuela. So, Molly, are you optimistic right now? Are you in the hopeful new year phase? Or are you in the, it's not going to be good?
I'm in the it's better than it was this time last year. Right. Last year, we were about to witness the swearing in of Donald Trump. Right. Remember that? And Republicans had taken the House, they had the Senate, and they had, by the way, a pretty commanding lead, right? I mean, I think they got 4 seats, and Trump was being sworn in, and we knew he was going to do some bad stuff because we had read Project 2025, but most people didn't believe us. And that, I think, was worse because at that moment, there was really a sense where a lot of the American people, maybe not the American people, but there certainly was a feeling like Trump has a mandate, we should trust him. Because this time at least he had won the popular vote, and you'll remember last time he hadn't. So there was a feeling that Donald Trump had a mandate, and certainly people were both, I think, scared. Certainly a lot of people were scared, but then there were also people who truly believed that this was the will of the people. Fast forward a year later, it's very clear that this is not, that the people may have some, the popular vote may have gone to him, but they did not want what he is selling.
So it's interesting you say that because I was listening to Ezra Klein being interviewed by John Heilman. It was a very interesting discussion for people who have not listened to it. I recommend it. And Ezra kind of made a sort of a similar point and pointed to the results of the gubernatorial election in New Jersey. Essentially, that what turned the sense that Trump is not invincible and that that Democrats are doing better was the overperformance, particularly in the New Jersey gubernatorial election. Now, I know you live in New York City, so you have a genetic disorder that doesn't allow you to see across the Hudson River. There are other states.
No, I'm not. I think you're wrong.
So I'm sure you're going to now tie this back to the New York City mayoral election. But do you think that whichever election in November, do you think that was kind of the turning point for this kind of sense that, the American people are not really entirely behind him?
I think, Ezra had a really good piece last week about the sort of the companies, the billionaires going along with Trumpism because they never really wanted to go along with any of the sort of reparations for racism, not monetary reparations, but reparations against racist actions that were sort of, anti-discrimination actions, right? That they did not want to do any of that anti-discrimination stuff, and that in fact they were sort of felt that when Trump was elected, that was their cop-out, that they could then no longer do that kind of thing. And billionaires too, right? That they could no longer pretend to care about any number of important moral issues. And so I do think that really was crushing last January to watch all those billionaires be kleptocrats, to watch all those companies reverse DEI, reverse all the stuff that we had thought of as progress. So now it's a year later, and I'm thinking about Target, right? Target said, we are going, no more DEI, we're done with it, Trump is president. So Target has had just this horrendous year because people had said, okay, you don't want to reflect my morals, I won't, shop at your shop. So for me, it's been a very gratifying year because what I've seen is that the American people are actually much better than the billionaire class. They have morals and values, and they shop with them, and so for me, I feel like that kind of thing is, it's hard to, you can't put a sort of, it's not a number, right? It's not a polling number, but it does sort of affect the general gestalt of people like us who cover this.
You've said this to me before, so I think you'll think this is okay. That, you hang out with, or not that you hang out with, but you have access to the fancy people. And so you are like a good sociologist in sort of their thinking and what motivates them. Do you think that this antipathy that they have expressed, like, is this surprising to you, or was this always sort of latent in their, like, you know what I mean? Like, if I'd asked you 4 years ago, were they basically the same and they were just pretending, or have they actually changed?
They would, a lot of those people would say that they were pushed to the right by crazy requests of the left, requests like not being racist. Let the record show that I am ironically smiling because I think it's so stupid. But, they'll say they were pushed to the right, but I think that they always felt that they were going to be protected by a Republican government, and they wanted the tax cuts. Elon Musk was not cutting the federal government because he was idealistic or because he gave a fuck, excuse my French, about the national debt, right? I mean, he doesn't care. He was doing it because he could and because he wanted to, he believed in this general, starving of common people and tax cuts for very wealthy people. I think a lot of these people believe that.
Every time you say this, you get to a point where you say, and they wanted the tax cuts. And I just wonder, like, is it more complicated than that? Like, is that just like, honestly, because I'm also watching, I guess some folks from your fair city are considering moving. Is it just fundamentally about the tax? Is it fundamentally just tax cuts?
There was on Twitter this sort of billionaire, they were really mad about, Ro Khanna had suggested that there should be wealth, sort of some kind of taxation, not just on income, but on wealth. And this got a lot of the billionaires on Twitter very angry, and they were going to primary him. They were going to move. If you are sensitive to state taxes and you still live in California, like, you've probably already moved to Texas or Florida. Like, the idea that this will be the thing. But, a lot of people said they were going to move when Zoran became mayor. So far, we have not seen that, if anything.
George Santos has said he's moved.
Yeah, well, that will be another grifter gone. But yeah, I mean, I think it's not only about taxes, but it's largely about, I think there is going to be anti-monopoly legislation and anti-monopoly, like Lina Khan, with the next Democratic administration, Lina Khan will not just be, she'll be like the vice president or something, right? Because it's clear that part of how we got to these extreme wealth is by monopolies. So that is not going to be good for billionaires, right? They don't want that. They don't want any kind of fettering of their capitalism. And then I also think, a lot of those guys are benefiting from the crony capitalism that is Trumpism. So that crew is not going to want to see that go.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been nursing this idea. We've talked about it before. I've talked on Nicole's podcast and on her TV show about this. And I'm becoming more convinced about it, that we kind of got the wrong word in capitulation. Like, capitulation really suggests the idea that you have, this these group of people who are fighting and fighting and fighting, and just at some point they become exhausted by the fight and they give in. It's kind of like, they're under siege and they just eventually give in. These corporate titans and wealthy individuals, they didn't capitulate to Donald Trump. I mean, they collaborated with Donald Trump. Like when we talk about regimes in other parts of the country and in other times in history, we never use the term capitulation. We talk about collaborators, right? We don't say that the industrial base of Germany capitulated to Hitler. It collaborated with Hitler. I'm not accusing
Right.
Donald Trump of being Hitler, everyone. I'm just saying, like it's a weird moment that we have sort of soft pedaled what
Yeah.
these folks are doing.
Well, a good example is Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post. Because that's a great example of someone, he owns the Washington Post, Donald Trump finds it annoying, it's gone. Sherry Redstone and, Stephen Colbert. Donald Trump doesn't like it, she wants to sell Paramount, it's gone. So I think that's right. I would also add that I think one of the things Democrats got wrong with Biden, and perhaps because it was such a different time, it was harder to nail this, but like Democrats cannot be the party of corporations. They cannot be the party of Uber and Starbucks and Amazon. They can't be that. And the reason why they can't be that is twofold. One is if you want to run on populism, you need to espouse populist ideals. And the other reason is because these corporations have really mistreated the people who work for them. Amazon, Uber, Starbucks, huge Starbucks strikes. Like you can't, that world of democratic corporatists, it's over. It's an impossible line to walk.
I feel like I was early to this. I've been asked probably 1,000 times about the fact that I was at a large law firm and then started my own law firm and, took on fights against Donald Trump. And I always say that, the big law firm I worked for was among the best there is. In fact, they were targeted by the Trump administration and they stood up and fought back against them rather than capitulate.
As opposed to the many that capitulated.
But, Molly, I have said that the turning point for me, the reason why in 2021, which if you think about it, was kind of an odd time because at that point, Biden's in the White House. Trump looks like he's in the rearview mirror. The thing that was unsustainable for me was that in March and April of 2021, you have Georgia passing its voter suppression law, Texas passing its voter suppression law, Florida passing its voter suppression law, Iowa, right? I could list a dozen more states. It was the big voter suppression push. And corporate America took out a full page print ad. Like if you were to look up in the dictionary the definition of what is the least you could do, taking out a full page print ad in the New York Times, there'd be a picture of it. Like here are all these companies that had lectured you and I about how much they care about democracy. Like they had lectured us about how they were good corporate citizens, not just in how they treated their workers, but how they treated their communities. And I had always been a proponent of corporate engagement in democracy. I'd always pointed out that, for example, and you may know this, that when Sherrod Brown was the Secretary of State of Ohio. I'm not talking about member of Congress before he was a senator. I mean Secretary of State, which was way before that. We're talking about the 1980s. McDonald's put on the back of their placemats a voter registration form. So you could literally, if you're in McDonald's, you could register to vote by just flipping over the placemat, filling it out, and turning in a box. And here we are, I found myself in 2021 by a bunch of corporate executives who were like, well, there's really nothing we can do. And I'm like, what do you mean there's nothing you could do? As you say, Uber, you guys managed to create an entire industry by violating the municipal taxi laws. Like, you look at all these companies, all they did was tell us they could do anything. And now when it came to democracy, they seemed they were powerless. And so I totally agree with you, Molly, that it's unsustainable because of how they treat their workers and other things, but it's also, they kind of gave up any pretense that they really cared about the communities or the future of the country.
Can you imagine now if they would take an ad out, they wouldn't even do that.
No.
right? Because it's too scary. Don't want to make Trump mad.
I have been saying that the biggest threat to the free and fair elections in 2026 is the fact that the Department of Justice is trying to collect the full voter files in all 50 states. This is for people who don't know. Every state has a list of everyone who's ever voted or registered in their state, and includes your social security number, your address, your party registration, a whole, whether you've moved, whether you voted earlier in person or by mail. It's a lot of personal information, and DOJ is trying to access this. My law firm and I are fighting them in 22 states. Okay, that's kind of the background to this. But I went back and I looked to see, has this happened before? And I had forgotten that in 2017, you may remember, Donald Trump set up a voter fraud commission. And that voter fraud commission tried to access these same records. And so I went and I looked at the court filings because ultimately they were defeated. And it was one big law firm after another. It was like every one of the big law firms at that time, wanted to be seen as in these pro-democracy cases. And of the 22 lawsuits that I mentioned, Molly, you know how many involve a big law firm defending against the Department of Justice? I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Molly Jong-Fast in a moment. I founded Democracy Docket in 2020 to spotlight Republican efforts to undermine free and fair elections. And that work is more important today than ever before. We built this YouTube channel to help keep you informed and engaged in what's happening in democracy, what our elected officials are saying, and what the most interesting and insightful voices in democracy have to offer us. Support this channel by hitting the subscribe button below, and also hit the bell to make sure you are notified when new videos are posted.
How many?
0. Not a single one. Not one.
The big law firm capitulation has been worse, I think, than billionaire capitulation, because billionaires, it makes sense, right? They're craven. You don't get behind every great fortune is a great crime. Okay, that makes sense.
I can't believe they still invite you to dinner parties.
I don't have that many friends, but
no wonder.
It's okay. It's more than enough. But the thing that I think when you think about these law firms is your whole shtick is that you fight people and that you fight for people, and you can't even fight for yourselves.
No, that's exactly right. You mentioned the Washington Post, and you are a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, which has clearly emerged from
the only game in town. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. It is emerged as not only the only game in town, but the doing, kind of the best platform, the best technology, the best coverage, the best, breadth from, in terms of like everything from like what gadgets to buy to like, what's going on in Pakistan. Right. So you see that organization. You came from Vanity Fair, which was a storied brand when magazines were the kings of everything, right, but still has a storied brand, but has, run into more.
Really shrunk. Yeah.
Has shrunk, but also run into, the whole Olivia Nuzzi thing was a little weird,
Not
right?
Great.
And you've also been up close in the what we will call the new media, right? You have a very, very widely listened to and watched podcast. You also have published on Substack. You are familiar with, no doubt, other independent media outlets like Democracy Docket. And of course, you're also a regular on MSNBC, which gave you insight into legacy TV media and now sort of independent cable television, right? Because of the spinoff. Having recited now, I think, most of your credentials, as you look ahead to 2026, like it has felt like there's been this steady decline. Is it just more of the same? Is it more of the same going faster? Or is there going to be something different about media in 2026 than we saw in 2025?
I would just say, whenever we talk about media, I always want to think about the tax incentives that oil companies have gotten. Think about the many ways in which tobacco companies and, all the things that our government has chosen to prop up as opposed to just the news. And I just think about that all the time, because the UK has like 5, 6 newspapers. They have the BBC, which is this incredible news organization. They have, we do not have to live like this. This was a choice our government made for us to prop up oil companies, to even Tesla, owned by Elon Musk, the richest man in the world. He got if you had given the Washington Post the kind of tax credits that Elon had gotten, the Washington Post would be a humongous newspaper today. So I do think it's important to realize that we are a culture that has really starved the news and used as many incentives as possible to grow oil and gas and these EVs and stuff like that. So I just think that's an important thing to realize.
And by the way, even under Joe Biden, what about the CHIPS Act? I mean, that was, that's technology. That was like to grow domestic semiconductor industry.
Yeah. No, the whole thing.
There was no News Act.
No. Right? And Joe Biden, I mean, one of the, I think, of the big failings was that Joe Biden and again, it was a pandemic. And so I think there were things, people were panicked in a way they might not have otherwise been. But he really, his entire, he was a case of a failure of imagination. He was, a candidate who was picked because they seemed the least offensive. And that is not a recipe for winning, even against Donald J. Trump, which I think is an important piece of information.
But go back to the media, though. Go back to so they did not get tax credits, and that is true.
Right, they did not get any. If anything, they have been just treated as badly as possible. I mean, I think I've said this to you before because I was so shocked by it. I was once at a book party where senator said we have no fact checking on the internet. I don't know, and he had been in the Senate for the last 40 years, 30 years, and I thought that would have been you. You were the person who could have legislated fact checking on the internet. So again, we are on the precipice of AI slop, of fake videos of all of us doing terrible things. So the question is, do I believe am I optimistic at all? And the answer is I am sort of optimistic, and I'll tell you why. And this is because I think community notes is good. And I think people actually want that things have gone so, PolitiFact said it was the year of the lie. Things have gone so far to the other side that I think that there's a feeling that the truth is actually, I remember the first time a piece of red sludge got shared by someone like Elon, some story about Nancy Pelosi's husband that was a lie. Now Elon and Trump do stuff like that, as many, many times a day. I saw a billionaire on Twitter, Bill Ackman, share a thing about Minnesota child care institutions giving millions of dollars to political candidates. $35 million. That's not right.
So I wanted to ask you about this, actually. I'm so glad you raised it because I wrote something recently for Democracy Docket about Bill Ackman and a post exchange he had on X. And it was about Minnesota. It wasn't about that. It was about, I think it was Scott Pressler, who's a right-wing,
the walk
activist.
Away guy.
Yeah, exactly. He posted a Minnesota law that basically says if you show up without voter ID, without you don't bring you forget your wallet at home, someone who personally knows you and personally knows where you live can swear out an affidavit, essentially, and vouch that you are who you say you are and where you live. Okay. Now, by the way, this is a law that is common in a number of states, including a number of red states. This is not something Minnesota invented, but in the way that Scott Pressler does, he suggested that this is voter fraud. In fact, he labeled it voter fraud. And then Bill Ackman on top, reposts on top of that. He says, can someone explain what the, best argument is against voter ID? It doesn't make any sense or something to words to this effect. And then Harmeet Dillon, who, by the way, is a senior Justice Department official. She literally oversees the Civil Rights Division, which is the Voting Rights Act, attacks me and says it's because Mark Elias and his henchmen believes that minorities are too dumb to have ID or something. And I'm looking at this and I'm just having this surreal moment. I wrote about this. First of all, if you're Bill Ackman's a very wealthy man. He could call any expert at any time, and actually, if he was interested in the answer to his question, I mean, he's got to know 1,000 lawyers.
But Mark,
he's got to have the ability.
Don't you watch CBS? We are not interested in experts anymore. We're only interested in the common man and his expertise.
Why wouldn't a Bill Ackman, though, be like, you know what, I'm going to call a lawyer at Skadden Arps or whatever big law firm.
He probably has a lawyer on retainer. I would think that someone that libelous would have a lawyer on retainer.
Well, I'm thinking someone that wealthy and in business would have the ability. And so, what is it about powerful men now that they just be like, this is what some provocateur on Twitter said.
But here's a question. I have a real question about this. This guy is very, very rich, and he is targeting just normal people on Twitter. Do they have any, you can't sue for harm? I mean, if you're, for example, didn't the guy who was the diving guy, the Thai diver, where Elon was like, he's a pedophile.
Oh, yeah. The caves, right?
He was able to sue. If you're just a normal person on Twitter and Bill Ackman decides to do something that maligns you, aren't you able to sue?
I mean, look, the laws involving libel and defamation and slander are state by state, but in general, the platforms themselves are immune, but people who post on them are not. The truth is, I'm not on X other than to, occasionally I found this thing because someone sent it to me because they said Harmeet Dillon just attacked you and called you and your henchmen basically racist, which is the second level of bizarreness. But the thing I wrote about was specifically about Ackman because I just assumed that someone that wealthy with this many lawyers would be able to just find out the answer. Why does Minnesota have this law? Are there other states that have this law? But it's not just him. There seems to be, whether it's Elon Musk, whether it is, who's the guy, Sachs, from California.
That guy's great. I love
whatever.
That
There
guy.
just seems to be a general, let's just work this out on social media as opposed to we're really rich. We could consult with the world's experts on this.
It's the death of expertise, right?
You think expertise is being targeted?
I mean, I think it would be hard to, in a country where Dr. Anthony Fauci is considered to be just the most divisive figure when he's just a doctor who knows about pandemics, I think expertise is being, you don't put RFK Jr. in charge of health unless you have and then he goes and swims in Rock Creek Park. You don't do that unless you have a pretty negative feeling about expertise.
I want to bring you back to my media question. So you think you're more optimistic, but do you think...
I'm more optimistic because I think that this is unsustainable, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're going anywhere good. It just means that I don't see a way in which we can keep going like this.
But do you think it is do you think a year from now or 5 years from now, we will just have we will have larger, small publications? Do you think that there will be one really big one like the New York Times and then a reemergence of local? Do you think television do you think the spinoff of MSNBC to MS Now gives it a new lease on life? Or do you think that's just do you think podcasting? I feel like I was late to podcasting. Now everyone's we're past peak podcasting. Nobody told me that. But anyway, do you think it's podcasting is what do you when you look in your crystal ball, what is the thing that will be the future of media?
I don't know. Maybe it's I'd like to think, but this is my own maybe this is my own wishful thinking, but I'd like to think that there's reporting, that there's my dream, let me tell you my dream scenario, is that the Washington Post and the LA Times get bought by people who are good stewards and who are not the people who own them now, and they pour money into reporting and try to make and also opinion and create real, if you have a country where you have like a Chicago Tribune, a Washington Post, a Miami Herald, and LA Times, you're in pretty good shape. And then and that's what I hope. And then to have, one of the things that would be really great is if the streamers like Netflix and YouTube and and maybe not Hulu, but every one of those streamers had a news channel. That would be another really great, or they partnered with a news channel, and I think that would be great. And then you just had more, if you had a crowdsourced fact checking on the internet, that would be great. And then you would have some kind of regulation when it comes to AI. What I think is so interesting about AI at this moment is, for me, it just creates a lot of slop that I have to weed through. So I have yet to have it make my life easier in any which way.
I was about to say, you and me both. I feel like maybe I am not using it right, because I don't find it ever helpful. Like they're like, oh, it's really good at these things. And then I'll be like, okay, I'll try those things. And finally I said to my son, I'm like, I used it for something the other day. I used it to spell check a document. And he's like, Microsoft Word could just do that for you.
Yeah, I was going to say spell check is not,
but like literally I can't find a use for it.
But what's interesting about AI too is that the people who have been pushing it the hardest are the people who seem the most nefarious, right? Elon, David Sachs, that crew, the people who pushed Bitcoin, who pushed NFTs, who pushed a lot of technology that has proven to not to be sort of no there. But another thing I think that's interesting about AI is that, part of it is they want to build humongous data centers to power this AI, which is wildly unpopular if you're a person with eyes.
It's interesting because as I think about the data center debate, and I hear what you're saying about, Bitcoin and crypto and the fights in Congress about, what laws to pass.
If only there have been fights to Congress. The best example of how corrupt this is Kristen Sinema lobbying for data farms.
The point, though, that I want to connect up with what you said, though, which I've never really thought about before, so I'm sort of repeating you, but I think it's really insightful, is, we think of government regulation and the tax code as fundamentally a neutral set of rules that just kind of are what they are. And they really aren't. There are a series of policy choices about who you want to be the winners and who you want to be the losers are. And so, at various times, Congress made decisions that the oil and gas industry should be winners. Like that's maybe they had good reasons for that. Maybe they had bad reasons, but it actually, I'm not even interested in litigating out whether it was good or bad, but it was just a set of decisions. And when Congress passes crypto regulation or deregulation, it's like, it's making a decision. Again, good or bad, it's making a decision to do something there. And you're exactly right. There's nothing that would have prevented at some point Congress from saying, you know what, we are going to provide tax credits to any news organization that hires reporters or that puts out a print edition. We're going to give a tax credit for ink and paper to put out print editions in communities where that, like at any point, Congress could have done that, which would have been basically a rounding error in the national. It would
have been a game changer, in a country where we struggle with literacy, where we have very low literacy rates, where we really do struggle with education. These are the kind of things you do that have giant returns.
Yeah, no, it's not a debate usually what the debate boils down to is people saying, well, this, Vanity Fair pivoted too late to the internet because it was clinging to advertising in print editions. And the Washington Post made this mistake because of whatever. And cable news should have done that, or the nightly news should have done X, Y, and Z. When in fact, like those are business realities. But other industries have avoided having to make. You asked the question about defamation.
Exxon.
Yeah, we made a decision in the mid 1990s to pass a law that basically holds platforms immune from defamation lawsuits. Like you asked about defamation. Like, if I print something on my website from you that you authored, the question is, should there be defamation? What if you post it on Twitter? What if you posted it in the physical real world? I can tell you, in the physical real world, the publisher could be liable, but we've decided that the platforms are not liable, and that is not a self-evident thing. That's just a judgment.
I think repealing Section 230 I just don't see how you don't do that.
Right. That's what I'm referring to as the immunity for the platforms.
Yeah, because I just don't see how because it's like every single thing our government has done in the last 10 years has been to make Elon Musk a billion, the richest person in the world, a trillionaire, soon to be trillionaire, because it's like you have this website, you don't ever have to, people can say whatever they want on it. Meanwhile, if you publish a newspaper, you can't lie, right? You have to have I just think that is wild. At every point, the sort of tech billionaire has been the protected class.
Let's turn to the 2026 midterm elections. I'll tell you my base case. I think Democrats are going to retake the House. I think Democrats are going to overperform in the Senate. I don't know if they'll retake the Senate or not, but I think they'll do better than people currently think. I think that the White House plan is all about voter suppression and election subversion. They are not about trying to persuade voters. They're not even about trying to turn out voters. They are trying to unturn out. They're trying to disenfranchise voters who they see are heavily motivated to vote against him. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of that. Look, I think they will definitely try a lot of really sketchy stuff. The good news, and I think you can attest to this, is that a lot of these people are not so smart. And so, and Donald Trump does not have a great, he is not able to do something without narrating it. So if he decides to suppress voters, which I think he ultimately will try to, he will say things like, we're going to make it harder to vote. Because he always does, he says things like, you didn't want to vote anyway. So I think there'll certainly be some of that. I think, look, this is an interesting week we're talking, because Trump has had a big loss when it comes to the National Guard, sending the National Guard in. And that, right? And that's now no longer Chicago, California. So he's had a big loss on that. And that was, I think, part of his voter suppression play, was National Guard. And then I think, but this is going to be the kind of thing where people are just going to have to keep fighting. And by the way, it's not going to get better when Democrats take back the House, if they do, because I don't think Donald Trump is plans to go quietly when his term is up.
Before we get to that, do you agree that Democrats are set up well for the midterms? Are you in the all is well camp, or are you in the it's not really all that well, it just looks better than it is?
For the midterms, they're pretty well set up. There's going to be, I think Texas is going to be, there's a real primary for Texas Senate. I don't know that that's a flippable seat, but maybe it is. I think that Ohio, that Senate seat, the Sherrod Brown seat, I could see Sherrod Brown winning that. Maybe not. But if anyone's going to win, it's going to be Sherrod. I think that there are certainly, there are a bunch of Senate seats that I could see Democrats winning.
Yeah,
but
Maine, North Carolina,
maybe.
Michigan will all be, Georgia will all be competitive. Yeah.
Right. I think, but certainly there will be, it's going to be a nail biter. This is not going to be a cakewalk just because of the voter suppression and because the admin is going to try lots of crazy stuff. And they're going to get increasingly more crazy as they get more desperate. And, one of the things I think a lot about with Trump try to go to war with Venezuela, and there's a really good piece in the Times about this today, was there are a couple of things that Trump wants from Venezuela, from a war with Venezuela, which hopefully will not happen, but who knows. And one is, oil or some kind, some, and part of it is like the want to invoke the Alien Enemies Act and to have a real conflict to be able to use some of these zombie laws that he hasn't been able to otherwise get going. I do think as he gets more desperate, as his polling gets worse and worse, we'll see more erratic behavior out of him as we have previously. I mean, the thing is, we have now spent a decade of our lives covering this guy. So, I mean, I was in my 30s. I remember being in my 30s. Like, it's just, we just keep going here. So I do think, I think it's going to get, this next couple years is not going to be like sleeping great and feeling good about what's happening.
Yeah, it's wild to think a year ago we were talking about Trump perhaps invading Greenland, and now we're talking about Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is he didn't invade Greenland.
Right.
And the good news is that he talks a big game but doesn't do a lot of this stuff, which is both good and also why the rest of the world thinks we're a joke.
Last question on politics. 2028, too early to start speculating, or do you have a thesis? I won't even ask a candidate. Do you have a thesis for a candidate?
I mean, my thesis is that Democrats are going to have to let the primary I mean, for me in pundit world, I think the big question is going to be just how can Democrats get run on populism? How can they, it's clearly, the Democratic legislation is way, way, way more populist than tax cuts for billionaires. So the question is, how can they do it? And I think like a fulsome primary process where you really have people out there will be the only way to do it, and just not closing ranks. In some ways, the worst thing I think is when let the candidate who is the real candidate rise to the top, like Obama, and not sort of so much Monday morning quarterbacking from the pundit class about electability. Right? There will be a candidate who is the best candidate, hopefully, and we won't have a 2020 situation.
My belief is that the thing that matters most in presidential politics is that you have the person who catches fire and burns hot for a relatively short period of time. I mean, Barack Obama was, had gotten to the U.S. Senate in
2 years, 18 months before.
Yeah, right, before he runs for president. And, and Joe Biden had been on the scene for a long time, unquestionably, but he actually wasn't doing that well in that election. And then he catches fire in South Carolina and kind of like winds up running the table. And so to me, it's very hard to know who that's going to be, because it's not like you have someone who runs post to post. You know what I mean? Like you just have like these situations. And as a result of that, I'm sort of less of a believer that it is going to be programmatic and it's going to be more personality.
I mean, you are talking to the person who wrote a piece for the Washington Post after Biden lost 2 of those primary contests, which was like, stop calling him the front runner. He's not running in front. Which I look like an idiot for about 4 years, but now I feel pretty good about that piece. And the thinking is, again, the primary map is, there were a lot of fuck ups in 2020, remember, but because they didn't, Iowa wasn't.
I remember well. Yeah, the Iowa caucus was special.
Not good.
Not good.
But I do think, if you were to look back at Obama, and I was just thinking about this when you were talking, it's like Obama would have been elected in this midterm cycle. So if you're looking at a Tellerico, or you're looking at someone like that, a Janet Mills, I mean, obviously neither of those people are probably going to be president. I think Tellerico's too young and Janet Mills is obviously too old. But there is certainly a sense in which those are the people who would run, if you were to look at it as a 1-for-1 with Obama, which I think is interesting.
What is in store for you? Your podcast keeps growing.
I
You
hope.
seem busier and
Will you
busier,
come on my
doing more and more.
podcast? Will you come on my
Oh,
podcast? Okay,
every
good.
day, any day you ask, I'm there.
Okay, good.
I love your podcast. I listen to it. I don't I'm more of a podcast listener than I
Yeah,
am
me
a
too.
podcast watcher, which is not something I
Yeah.
should say since I
Nope.
want people to watch this podcast. So you have a lot of things going on. What is your priority for next year?
I mean, I like writing my opinion pieces at the Times. I mean, I'm really a writer. Like, I am really a writer. That's kind of what I think of myself as more than anything. Like, that's just. But so I'm going to write another book. I think I'm going to write this book about my grandfather in the blacklist, which I think will be pretty interesting. I want to write more books. I want to do more. I really like writing, but and more podcasting, and I want. I just wish. My wants for myself are like. Are hard for me to separate from what I want for the mainstream. I want newspapers to grow, and I want there to be an American version of the BBC, and I want people to be able to get, this is maybe my own inability to separate myself from the world, but I really would love to see like a ProPublica have more of a sort of government. I mean, the thing, if you want to weed out, obviously, Elon Musk never really wanted to end waste, fraud, and abuse. But if you did actually want to end waste, fraud, and abuse, something like ProPublica would be the fastest way to do that, right? Because a sort of nonpartisan reporting arm that speaks truth to power, that is all about oversight, would actually be the way to do it, which I just think is really interesting.
I said it was my last question, but I'm going to ask you another one based on that. So the one thing I don't want to say I disagree with you on, but which I want to challenge, is you mentioned the British press. I think part of the reason why the British press is successful, set aside BBC, I'm talking about the print media, is because they don't do the throat clearing of we are nonpartisan. Like, I don't think they say they're partisan, but they don't. But there is this like grating for many of us, not for you, and probably not for a lot of us. For a lot of us, it's just like, and by the way, this is one of the critiques you hear on the right about the media, and it's increasing the criticism you hear on the left about the media is, like the ethos in the United States for print outlets is to say we are, we report without fear or favor.
Right. Yes.
And we are neither Democrats or Republicans. And since both of them hate us, we must be doing the right thing. And I have to say, I don't buy that. And I don't actually think I think it is, I think it makes the news outlets feel better to say it, but I don't think it is true. I think part of the reason why you are successful is people know who you are, and they know what you are coming at them with, and they can judge that for themselves.
I always think you have to be for something or someone, and that you can't be for no one. That said, something like ProPublica, the reason why I used nonpartisan was because it doesn't have an opinion, any kind of opinion element, and so I think of opinion as being more partisan, and I think of like the straight reporting that ProPublica does as being just completely nonpartisan. Now, I do think you're right, and you really do get into trouble because part of why you cover, what decisions you make to put things in articles, that when you look at news analysis, you're analyzing specific things, and so those are all partisan choices. Whether or not that's admitted is true. So I do think that's possibly true, though I don't know that's why the UK has that. I think they're just a culture. It's a slightly different culture too. But the UK is a great example because it's a country where much of the country is as poor as Alabama, but they still have better literacy numbers than we do. And so I think That is something to just, you want. I mean, I think one of the big issues in America is that we just don't, our education is not up to snuff, and we're not getting the kind of literacy, adult literacy, that we need in order to maintain a democratic system.